Okay, so this week we are going to be talking about language and the brain, and it's a fascinating topic when it comes to psychology as a natural science because traditionally language has been studied, in academic linguistic departments as a behavior. So the behavior of language, the structure of language, the grammar of language, whether there's a universal grammar, of language, etc. And at the other end, it's been studied, to some extent by neurologists, right? And folks who have patients who suffer from either language production problems, expressive language aphasias. We're going to learn about where they have difficulty, putting the words in the appropriate, order and expressing, sort of language, and those who have receptive aphasias, difficulty with, understanding or comprehending language. And so those two camps, the neurologists who studied, traumatic brain injuries, stroke, etc., and the consequences to language, and the linguists, who were studying the behavior, really didn't come together until, about probably a couple decades ago now. And start looking at neurolinguistics, right? And how the brain and the underlying physiology relate, specifically to aspects of language comprehension and expression. So this week we're going to be delving into that in more detail. There are a lot of videos up here that I would like you to actually go through to get the basics about what language is, what expressive aphasias are, what receptive aphasias are. We're going to be talking about Broca's aphasia and Wernicke's aphasia and conduction aphasia and transcortical motor aphasias and transcortical sensory aphasias. And we're going to be also sort of focusing in on how language, is separate from the form of expression. Like there are networks specifically in the brain that are far more extensive and complex than were initially identified, by neurologists who saw, areas of injury and correlated that with, specific expressive and receptive functions. Much more complexity we're learning in these actual networks when we start to, apply imaging and other sort of modern techniques to how the brain is operating when we are expressing language or comprehending language. But the form of expression, it can be speech, right? It can be sign, it can be writing, right? And damage to specific networks in the brain that are involved in language, let's say expression, will lead to impairments in any form of expression if you're actually doing specific damage to those networks that are involved in language. And the same is true for comprehension. If you're damaging those regions, which we're going to see are more posterior in the brain, that are involved in language comprehension, sort of reception of language, it's any form of reception typically. If you're damaging those specific regions that are involved in language, it leads to what we call a primary aphasia, comprehension aphasia, or receptive aphasia. So anyway, this week we're going to be really delving into language, and we'll go over all this in more detail, and there's more details in those individual videos. I also want to mention that this week we're going to be, this is the week that you turn in your art project, right? And the art project is basically, not meant to to frighten you about art skills or techniques, but it's a way for you to kind of delve a little deeper and think about, a particular incident of confirmation bias or belief perseverance that you've witnessed or experienced yourself personally. And there's a lot of that going on, obviously, all the time. It's one of these sort of basic psychological biases that we have. But I want you to try to think creatively about how to express it, how to express what happened and what you learned from it, in some form of art. And, again, this is not meant to test your art skill at all, but it's really just to give you a chance to sort of wrestle a little bit with a particular incident and then think about a drawing, an illustration, a sculpture, a poem, a musical piece, something that conveys something essential about that experience that you might be able to sort of communicate to others through your own kind of creative work. And that'll be a 10-point piece, is just to create something. And I'm not looking to harangue you about this or to stress you about this. Really, I want you to kind of think about what's another way you could express what happened and what you learned in an incident of confirmation bias or belief perseverance through some other medium. Instead of just writing down. I mean, you can write down. You can do it in the form of a poem, really, where you have some of the descriptive, aspects of what occurred, etc. And then add, either incorporate it into the work or as a separate sort of sheet. Just write a quick description, about what was the incident, what happened, and briefly what you learned about it. These do not have to be long, but I just want to see that you've made an effort, to try to consider a particular episode, and then portray it or illustrate it or convey it in some some kind of personally relevant sort of form. And please feel free to email if you have additional questions about this. And I look forward to your work, and have a wonderful week. And we'll see you in Zoom class.